Cedar Springs, Texas, September 12, 2010. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Cedar Springs High School as faculty members arrived for what should have been an ordinary Monday. The small town, nestled between rolling hills and vast farmlands, was known for its close-knit community and academic excellence. By 7:45 a.m., all teachers were present in the staff meeting, all except one, Marlene Hayes, 38, a beloved literature teacher with an impeccable attendance record spanning her 15-year career. When Marlene failed to appear for her first period class, fellow English department teacher Abigail Morton initially covered, assuming a minor delay. By second period, with no word from Marlene, Principal Keith Langford contacted her emergency contacts. The response was immediate concern. This behavior was entirely out of character for the methodical, dedicated educator. At 10:27 a.m., School Resource Officer Deputy Samuel Torres made a disturbing discovery. Marlene's silver Honda Accord was parked in its usual spot, row C, space 14, of the faculty parking area. Her leather messenger bag containing lesson plans for the week was found on the passenger seat. Her cell phone, however, was missing. "We initiated missing persons protocols immediately," recalled Detective Troy Blackwell, who arrived on scene at 11:05 a.m. When a person's vehicle is present but they aren't, and there's no communication, that's an immediate red flag. The Cedar Springs Police Department cordoned off Marlene's classroom, 213B, located in the east wing of the building. Initial observations revealed nothing obviously amiss. The room was meticulously organized, with literature analyses from Friday's class still written on the whiteboard. A half-empty coffee mug sat on her desk, lipstick marks visible on the rim. The room temperature was notably cool. The thermostat had been set to 68 degrees, Marlene's preferred teaching environment, according to colleagues. By mid-afternoon, Detective Serena Diaz joined Blackwell to lead the investigation. Their first critical decision was treating Marlene's classroom as a potential crime scene, despite the absence of obvious signs of struggle. This decision would later prove crucial. "We implemented a systematic approach," Detective Diaz later explained in her case notes. "When someone vanishes between their car and their workplace, every inch of that journey becomes significant." As forensics processed the scene, investigators conducted initial interviews with faculty and staff. A consistent picture emerged of Marlene Hayes. Divorced 5 years prior, no children, dedicated to her students and research on American Gothic literature. She lived alone in a modest bungalow approximately 7 miles from campus. Colleagues described her as private but warm, passionate about literature but strict about academic integrity. Marlene was the teacher who would stay after hours to help struggling students, reported Carol Jenkins, department head, but she was also known for her firm stance against plagiarism and academic dishonesty. She believed in maintaining high standards. By 4:30 p.m., officers executed a welfare check at Marlene's residence. They found her home undisturbed. Breakfast dishes in the sink, bed made, shower still damp. Her wallet containing credit cards and $43 in cash sat on the kitchen counter. The only item seemingly missing was her cell phone. The timeline began taking shape. Security footage confirmed Marlene's Honda entering the school parking lot at 6:28 a.m., significantly earlier than her usual 7 a.m. arrival. However, the school's external security cameras had a critical blind spot: the walkway from the parking lot to the east entrance, due to a large oak tree obstructing the view. Internal hallway cameras captured partial footage of Marlene walking toward her classroom at 6:35 a.m., carrying her messenger bag and what appeared to be her usual travel coffee mug. Her expression appeared neutral, showing no signs of distress. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Marlene Hayes. As the first day of investigation concluded, police expanded their search to the wooded area behind the school's athletic fields. K9 units traced Marlene's scent from her classroom to the faculty restroom on the second floor, but the trail ended there. No blood evidence or signs of struggle were found in either location. Detective Blackwell established the first critical window of investigation, the period between 6:35 a.m., when Marlene was last seen on camera, and 7:45 a.m., when her absence was first noted at the faculty meeting. During this 70-minute window, 14 individuals were confirmed on school premises, 9 faculty members, 3 janitorial staff, and 2 early arriving students attending a makeup chemistry lab. In the first 48 hours of any missing persons case, establishing a precise timeline is paramount, Blackwell noted. People's memories are freshest, physical evidence is least disturbed, and the likelihood of finding the person alive is highest. On day 2, forensic technicians made the first significant discovery. Using luminol testing in Marlene's classroom, they detected trace evidence of blood droplets near her desk, droplets that had been meticulously cleaned but not completely eliminated. The pattern suggested a low-velocity impact consistent with a minor injury rather than a violent assault. Additionally, Marlene's classroom trash can had been emptied, despite the school protocol that teachers leave trash for evening janitorial service. Head custodian Rafael Mendez confirmed that the emptied trash bag wasn't in any of the school's dumpsters, suggesting someone had removed it from the premises entirely. Cell phone records showed Marlene's phone had last pinged a tower near the school at 7:12 a.m., after which it either died or was powered off. Her final text message, sent to her elderly mother at 6:22 a.m., read, "Heading in early to prepare for senior presentations. We'll call tonight." By the third day, police had interviewed all students in Marlene's classes. Most accounts painted her as strict but fair, passionate about literature, and invested in student success. However, several students mentioned she seemed preoccupied in the week before her disappearance. Ms. Hayes was usually super focused, but that last week she kept checking her phone during class, reported sophomore student Alyssa Chen. She seemed worried about something. The most intriguing lead came when detectives examined Marlene's teacher planner. In the margins of the previous Thursday's page was a cryptic notation, RD, 6:30 a.m. Monday, discuss paper concerns. No student with those initials was enrolled in any of her current classes. When investigators accessed the school's digital records, they discovered Marlene had accessed one student file multiple times in the week before her disappearance. A senior named Ryan Donahue, who had been in her advanced placement literature class the previous academic year, but was not currently her student. A deeper review of Marlene's computer search history revealed another troubling pattern. She had researched academic integrity policies and procedures for reporting plagiarism to college admissions offices. Her browser history showed she had visited several university websites where Ryan Donahue had reportedly applied, including Cornell, Rice, and Vanderbilt. At this point, the investigation shifted. Detective Diaz later testified, "We weren't just looking for a missing teacher. We were examining the possibility that her disappearance was connected to her role as an educator, specifically to her unwavering commitment to academic integrity." As the first week of investigation concluded, Cedar Springs High School held a candlelight vigil for Marlene Hayes. The community remained hopeful, but detectives Blackwell and Diaz recognized the statistical reality. With each passing day, the likelihood of finding Marlene alive diminished significantly. What no one realized then was that the truth about Marlene's fate lay hidden within the very walls of Cedar Springs High School, a secret that would remain concealed for nearly 8 years, when a routine building renovation would uncover the chilling reality behind her disappearance. And at the center of this mystery was a brilliant young student with a promising future, impeccable academic credentials, and a darkness no one had detected. As investigators prepared to interview Ryan Donahue, they had no way of knowing they were already speaking to a master manipulator who had crafted an elaborate alibi designed to withstand scrutiny. The case was about to take its first major turn, and the disturbing profile of Ryan Donahue would soon begin to emerge from the shadows. As the investigation into Marlene Hayes' disappearance entered its second week, detectives Blackwell and Diaz shifted their focus to the digital footprint left behind by the missing teacher. What began as a routine examination of her school-issued laptop would uncover a complex web of concerns that had consumed Marlene's final days. Technology often reveals what people try to hide, Detective Diaz noted during a case briefing on September 19, 2010. In Marlene's case, her digital life spoke volumes about what was troubling her. Cedar Springs High School's IT administrator, Vincent Patel, provided investigators with complete access to Marlene's email account and network drives. The contents painted a picture of a dedicated educator increasingly troubled by a specific situation involving a former student. Beginning 3 weeks before her disappearance, Marlene had exchanged several emails with colleagues at neighboring universities regarding a student's application essays. One particularly telling email sent to Dr. Eleanor Wright at Rice University read, "I've encountered concerning similarities between the writing sample submitted to your department and work previously submitted in my AP Literature course. While I cannot make definitive accusations, I believe this warrants further review." Marlene had been careful not to name the student directly in these communications, referring only to a recent graduate with concerning patterns. However, her search history told a more specific story. She had run multiple searches for Ryan Donahue college applications, responsibility to report suspected plagiarism, and teacher liability for academic dishonesty. "She was caught in an ethical dilemma," explained Dr. Wright when interviewed. "As educators, we're obligated to report academic integrity concerns, but doing so can have life-altering consequences for students." Marlene was clearly weighing her professional responsibilities against the potential impact on this student's future. The most revealing discovery came from Marlene's personal Gmail account, accessed through her school computer. In a draft email never sent, dated just 2 days before her disappearance, she had written what appeared to be talking points for a confrontation, points to address with RD, original paper versus submitted applications, identical passages from Morrison analysis, options, withdraw applications containing plagiarized content, school honor code requirements, my professional obligations, meeting with principal scheduled for Tuesday. The digital trail revealed Marlene had been methodically building a case, saving side-by-side comparisons of Ryan Donahue's in-class essays with application materials she'd been asked to review as his former teacher. Highlighted passages showed striking similarities to published literary analyses, not just in ideas, but in specific phrasing and structure. She was doing her due diligence, Detective Blackwell observed, building an airtight case before making any formal accusations. While the digital investigation proceeded, forensic teams continued their meticulous examination of Marlene's classroom. Using specialized equipment, technicians discovered minute blood droplets extending in a pattern from her desk to the classroom door, evidence that had survived despite apparent cleaning efforts. DNA analysis confirmed it was Marlene's blood, though the quantity suggested a minor injury rather than a fatal assault. More telling was what investigators found beneath her desk. A small piece of broken ceramic, later determined to match the travel mug Marlene had been carrying when last seen on security footage. The fragment bore traces of both coffee and Marlene's lipstick, suggesting the mug had been broken during the critical 70-minute window of her disappearance. "We began developing a theory," Detective Diaz later testified. Marlene arrived early that Monday, specifically to meet with Ryan Donahue about her plagiarism concerns. The meeting escalated, resulting in some form of altercation. When investigators examined the school's security footage more extensively, they discovered something initially overlooked. At 7:23 a.m., roughly 48 minutes after Marlene was last seen entering her classroom, the cameras captured a figure moving rapidly through the hall outside room 203B. The individual's face wasn't visible, but they carried what appeared to be a black garbage bag and wore what looked like latex gloves. This critical piece of evidence corroborated the custodian's earlier statement that Marlene's trash can had been emptied before the regular janitorial rounds. The figure's height and build were consistent with those of a young adult male, though the hooded Cedar Springs Athletics sweatshirt obscured definitive identification. On September 21st, detectives formally interviewed Ryan Donahue for the first time. The 17-year-old senior arrived with his mother, Patricia Donahue, a local real estate agent and single parent. Ryan presented as polite, articulate, and visibly distressed by his former teacher's disappearance. "Ms. Hayes was the best teacher I ever had," he told investigators, maintaining steady eye contact. "She wrote my college recommendation letters. Why would anyone want to hurt her?" When questioned about his whereabouts on the morning of September 12th, Ryan provided what seemed like an airtight alibi. He claimed to have been at Cedar Creek Hospital from 5:30 a.m. until 9:15 a.m., volunteering in the geriatric ward as part of his community service requirements for the National Honor Society. "I scan in with my volunteer badge," Ryan explained. "The hospital should have those records. I do the morning shift every Monday." Indeed, Cedar Creek Hospital's electronic records confirmed Ryan had scanned into the volunteer entrance at 5:43 a.m. and out at 9:08 a.m. on the morning in question. The hospital was located 7 miles from Cedar Springs High School, a distance that would require at least 12 minutes to drive each way during morning traffic. When confronted with Marlene's notation about a 6:30 a.m. meeting, Ryan appeared genuinely confused. "I never scheduled any meeting with Ms. Hayes. I'm not even in her class this year. Maybe she confused me with another student. There's a freshman named Riley Duncan. That could be the RD she meant." Detective Blackwell noted Ryan's demeanor in his case files. Subject maintains consistent eye contact, shows appropriate emotional responses, and offers plausible explanations for all questions. Either he is telling the truth or he is exceptionally skilled at deception. The investigation hit its first major roadblock. Ryan's alibi seemed solid, supported by electronic records and the testimony of hospital staff who remembered seeing him that morning. The time window simply didn't allow for him to have been at the school during Marlene's disappearance. Desperate for leads, investigators expanded their technical analysis to include Marlene's personal cell phone records. Though the phone itself remained missing, her service provider supplied detailed data about calls, texts, and, crucially, the phone's location history based on cell tower pings. This data revealed something perplexing. Between 6:42 a.m. and 7:10 a.m. on September 12th, Marlene's phone had pinged multiple towers in a pattern consistent with movement away from the school, traveling approximately 3 miles north before the signal disappeared entirely. This contradicted the working theory that whatever happened to Marlene had occurred within the school building. The phone data introduced a new complexity, Detective Diaz explained. Either Marlene left the school during that time window, which contradicted our security footage, or someone else had her phone. As detectives grappled with this inconsistency, a custodial worker made a discovery that temporarily redirected the investigation. While cleaning an infrequently used faculty restroom in the school's east wing, he found a small gold earring backed behind a toilet. Marlene's sister identified it as belonging to the missing teacher, part of a pair she'd been wearing the day she disappeared. Forensic analysis of the restroom revealed more of Marlene's blood, this time in the grout between floor tiles. The pattern suggested someone had attempted to clean the area thoroughly, but couldn't completely remove traces from the porous material. By the third week of investigation, media coverage had intensified. The disappearance of a respected teacher from a school building during operational hours generated national headlines. Pressure mounted on the Cedar Springs Police Department to produce results. In response to this pressure, investigators obtained warrants to search Ryan Donahue's home and vehicle, despite his apparently solid alibi. The search yielded nothing immediately incriminating. No bloodstains, no sign of Marlene's missing phone, no suspicious materials. Ryan's academic record remained impeccable. Straight A's, perfect attendance, president of the debate club, and early acceptance letters from 3 prestigious universities. However, in Ryan's bedroom, detectives discovered something that caught their attention, a collection of true crime books focusing specifically on cases where perpetrators had successfully evaded detection. Titles like Perfect Crimes, Unsolved Mysteries, and The Science of Criminal Deception stood out among his otherwise academically focused bookshelf. More concerning was a journal found hidden between his mattress and box spring. While most entries detailed typical teenage concerns about college applications and social pressures, several passages revealed a darker perspective. People are so easily manipulated when you tell them what they expect to hear. Today, Mrs. Fernandez praised my authenticity in Spanish class after I recited the same personal story I've been using for 3 years. Different teacher, same result. It's almost disappointing how predictable authority figures are. Another entry, dated 3 weeks before Marlene's disappearance, read, H continues to probe into my application materials. Her suspicion is becoming problematic. She doesn't understand what's at stake for me. Some people insist on making things difficult when they could simply look the other way. While these writings raised concerns, they remained circumstantial. The journal never explicitly mentioned Marlene by name, using only the initial H. When questioned about these entries, Ryan explained that H referred to a Harvard admissions counselor who had questioned aspects of his application essay during an interview. I get anxious about college admissions, he told detectives. Writing helps me process my stress. It doesn't mean anything sinister. As September turned to October, the investigation stalled. Despite extensive searches of the school grounds, surrounding areas and local waterways, no further evidence of Marlene's whereabouts emerged. Her bank accounts remained untouched, her passport unused, her car undisturbed in the police impound lot. Ryan Donahue's alibi held firm. Hospital records confirmed his presence that morning, and multiple staff members remembered interacting with him during his volunteer shift. Without evidence directly connecting him to Marlene's disappearance, investigators could not proceed with charges or even name him as a suspect publicly. On October 28, 2010, after 7 weeks of active investigation, Detective Blackwell made the difficult decision to reclassify Marlene Hayes' case as a long-term missing persons investigation rather than an active crime scene. The evidence collected, blood droplets, the earring, digital communications, strongly suggested foul play, but without a body, a crime scene, or a viable suspect, the case had reached an impasse. We're not giving up, Blackwell told Marlene's family at their final briefing. We're simply acknowledging that we need more evidence to move forward. Sometimes these cases break years later when new information emerges or technology advances. As the investigation wound down, Ryan Donahue continued his senior year with distinction. He delivered the valedictorian address at graduation the following May, was featured in the local newspaper for his acceptance to Cornell University, and left Cedar Springs behind without a shadow of suspicion falling upon him publicly. What investigators didn't know then was that the hospital's electronic check-in system held a critical vulnerability, one that would only be discovered years later during an unrelated security audit. And somewhere within the aging walls of Cedar Springs High School, Marlene Hayes' final resting place remained hidden, silently preserving the evidence that would eventually bring her case back to life and reveal the disturbing truth about the brilliant student who had seemingly outsmarted law enforcement. As Ryan Donahue prepared to leave for college, the case of Marlene Hayes was relegated to a storage room at the Cedar Springs Police Department, filed among other unsolved mysteries awaiting the one crucial piece of evidence that would break them open. No one suspected that the truth lay buried within the digital and physical architecture of the school itself, waiting for advances in forensic technology and one observant construction worker to bring it to light nearly 8 years later. As the active investigation into Marlene Hayes' disappearance transitioned to a cold case in late 2010, detectives Blackwell and Diaz refused to let the file gather dust. Though they had been reassigned to new cases, they continued to meet weekly to review the evidence, convinced that the key to solving Marlene's disappearance lay in understanding the psychology and background of their prime person of interest, Ryan Donahue. "Some suspects keep you up at night," Detective Blackwell later recalled. Ryan was one of those. Every instinct told us he was involved, but his alibi was airtight and his persona was flawless. We needed to dig deeper into who he really was beneath that perfect facade. The detectives began building what they called a shadow profile, an unofficial psychological assessment compiled through interviews with people who had interacted with Ryan throughout his life. This approach, while unconventional, would eventually provide crucial context for understanding the events of September 12, 2010. Ryan Matthew Donahue was born on March 3, 1993, in Burlington, Vermont, to Patricia and Thomas Donahue. His early childhood appeared unremarkable until his parents' acrimonious divorce when he was 7 years old. Court records from the divorce proceedings revealed a bitter custody battle, during which Thomas Donahue alleged that Patricia was systematically conditioning Ryan to believe that extraordinary achievement was the only acceptable outcome. Following the divorce, Patricia gained full custody and relocated with Ryan to Cedar Springs, Texas, where she established herself as a successful real estate agent. Thomas remained in Vermont and gradually became estranged from his son, with contact ceasing entirely by Ryan's 12th birthday. The absence of his father created a void that Ryan filled with achievement, observed Dr. Eleanor Wright, who provided unofficial consultation on the psychological aspects of the case. His academic success became his identity, and anything that threatened that identity would be perceived as an existential threat. Ryan's academic record at Cedar Springs was impeccable from the moment he entered the school system. Elementary school teachers described him as exceptionally bright, but noted he was uncomfortable with failure of any kind. By middle school, he had developed a reputation for intellectual brilliance combined with an unusual intensity about grades and recognition. Even in 7th grade, Ryan would argue with teachers over half-point deductions on assignments, reported his former math teacher Martin Reynolds. Not disrespectfully, but with a persistence that was unsettling, he once stayed after school for 2 hours to debate a B+ grade until I eventually relented and gave him an A. In high school, Ryan's perfectionism intensified. He took the maximum number of advanced placement courses allowed, served as president of multiple academic clubs, and maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA. His SAT score of 1580 out of 1600 was the highest in school history. Teachers consistently praised his work, though several noted his tendency to tell them what they wanted to hear rather than express original opinions. What emerged from the shadow profile was a picture of a young man who had learned to manipulate the expectations of authority figures from an early age. Ryan's classmates, when interviewed confidentially, revealed a side of him rarely seen by adults. "Ryan could read people better than anyone I've ever met," said former debate team member Eliza Thornton. He knew exactly how to present himself to each teacher, scholarly and traditional with older teachers, progressive and innovative with younger ones. It was like watching an actor switch roles. More concerning were allegations that Ryan had engaged in subtle academic sabotage of potential competitors. Several students reported that their notes had gone missing before major exams in classes where Ryan was also enrolled. In one instance, a student's research paper draft disappeared from a shared computer lab, only for Ryan to submit a paper on the same obscure topic 2 weeks later. These allegations were never proven, Detective Diaz noted in her case files, but they established a pattern of behavior. Ryan would eliminate threats to his academic standing through calculated, difficult-to-trace methods. The most revealing insights came from Veronica Sandoval, a school counselor who had worked with Ryan briefly during his sophomore year. After his mother's insistence that the sessions be discontinued, Sandoval maintained minimal notes to protect Ryan's privacy. However, when approached by detectives, she expressed significant concerns about his psychological development. Ryan displayed classic signs of what we now recognize as narcissistic personality traits with sociopathic tendencies, Sandoval explained, under condition of confidentiality. He was extraordinarily skilled at presenting a carefully crafted persona to authority figures, while revealing little of his authentic self. His empathy appeared selective and performative rather than genuine. During their 3 counseling sessions, Ryan had described hypothetical scenarios that troubled Sandoval. One involved a student who hypothetically planted evidence to frame a rival for cheating, resulting in the rival's expulsion. Another described a character in a novel who maintained multiple distinct personas across different social groups, each unaware of the others. He presented these scenarios as intellectual exercises, Sandoval recalled, but they felt like confessions disguised as hypotheticals. When I attempted to explore this, he became withdrawn and subsequently convinced his mother to end our sessions. Patricia Donahue's role in Ryan's development became a focal point for investigators. Interviews with neighbors and colleagues revealed a mother fanatically devoted to her son's success. She had changed real estate agencies 3 times to ensure her work schedule accommodated Ryan's academic and extracurricular activities. Their home was described as shrine-like, with walls covered in Ryan's awards, certificates, and recognition letters. Patricia didn't just encourage Ryan's achievements, she demanded them, stated former neighbor Carolyn Weston. I once overheard her telling him that second place is just the first loser. He was 13 at the time and had placed second in a regional science fair. As investigators assembled this psychological profile, they also re-examined Ryan's seemingly perfect alibi for the morning of Marlene Hayes' disappearance. The hospital records showed he had scanned into the volunteer entrance at 5:43 a.m. and out at 9:08 a.m., making it physically impossible for him to have been at the school during the critical time window. However, a careful review of security footage from the hospital revealed something curious. While cameras captured Ryan entering at 5:43 a.m., wearing his volunteer uniform, his face was not clearly visible in any footage during the supposed 3.5 hours of his shift. He appeared briefly in the lobby at 9:05 a.m. before scanning out 3 minutes later. The gap in visual confirmation was significant, Detective Blackwell noted. We could prove he entered the hospital, and we could prove he left. What we couldn't prove was that he remained there the entire time. When investigators interviewed hospital staff again with specific questions about Ryan's activities that morning, they received conflicting accounts. While several staff members recalled seeing him at some point during the morning shift, none could confirm specific times or interactions. The volunteer coordinator acknowledged that the electronic scanning system was the only verification method used, as the geriatric ward where Ryan volunteered was often understaffed. The hospital's security protocols created a perfect opportunity, Detective Diaz theorized. Once scanned in, volunteers were essentially on an honor system. If Ryan had left through any of the hospital's 7 emergency exits, none of which required scanning out, he could have been absent for a significant period without detection. This theory gained traction when investigators discovered that Ryan's mother had given him a car for his 17th birthday, a black Mazda 3 that would have allowed him to travel between the hospital and school in approximately 12 minutes during early morning hours. Traffic camera footage from the route between these locations was no longer available, having been automatically overwritten after 60 days. As detectives reconstructed the possible timeline, A disturbing but plausible scenario emerged. Ryan could have scanned into the hospital at 5:43 a.m., immediately exited through an emergency door, driven to the school for his 6:30 a.m. meeting with Marlene, and returned to the hospital before his 9:08 a.m. checkout, all without disrupting his alibi. The theory addressed another puzzling aspect of the case: how Marlene's phone had traveled north of the school between 6:42 a.m. and 7:10 a.m., despite security footage never showing her leaving the building. If Ryan had taken her phone, perhaps after an altercation, and driven back toward the hospital with it, the cell tower pings would match the observed pattern. "We had constructed a plausible theory," Detective Blackwell explained. "But plausible theories aren't evidence. Without Marlene's body, without witnesses, without forensic evidence directly linking Ryan to her disappearance, we couldn't move forward with charges." The final piece of the shadow profile came from an unexpected source. In April 2011, as Ryan prepared to graduate as valedictorian, a former girlfriend from his sophomore year contacted the police department. Jessica Martinez had moved to Arizona following her parents' divorce, but had maintained connections with friends in Cedar Springs. "Ryan terrified me, but I could never explain why to anyone," she told detectives during a video interview. "He never threatened me or hurt me physically. It was more subtle, the way he would completely cut off emotional connection if I disappointed him in any way, the way he could switch from charming to cold in an instant if I questioned him." Jessica described an incident that had prompted her to end their relationship. During a study session at his home, she had accidentally spilled water on his laptop. While the device was undamaged, Ryan's reaction disturbed her deeply. "He didn't yell or get angry in a normal way," she recalled. "Instead, he became completely calm, unnaturally calm. He told me it was interesting to see how clumsy people make excuses to cover their inadequacies. Then he continued studying as if I wasn't there. For 3 hours, he acted as if I was invisible. When I finally got up to leave, he snapped back to his charming self and asked why I was going so early. It was like he had been teaching me a lesson about control." This account aligned with the emerging psychological profile of Ryan as someone who responded to perceived threats with calculated, psychologically manipulative behavior rather than impulsive aggression. If Marlene Hayes had confronted him about academic dishonesty that threatened his college admissions, and by extension, his entire identity, the psychological profile suggested he would respond with cold calculation rather than heated emotion. On May 15, 2011, Ryan Donahue delivered his valedictorian address to thunderous applause from the Cedar Springs community. His speech, titled "Truth as Our Highest Calling," emphasized the importance of academic integrity and ethical leadership. Detective Diaz, who attended the ceremony unofficially, described it as a masterclass in dramatic irony. 3 weeks later, Ryan left Cedar Springs for a summer internship at a research laboratory in Boston, before beginning his freshman year at Cornell University in August. With their primary person of interest now thousands of miles away and no new evidence forthcoming, the investigation into Marlene Hayes' disappearance gradually receded from active consideration. The case file remained open but dormant for nearly 7 years. Detective Blackwell retired from the force in 2015, though he continued to check on the case status monthly. Detective Diaz was promoted to department supervisor but kept a copy of Marlene's photo on her desk, a reminder of unfinished business. As for Ryan Donahue, he thrived at Cornell, graduating summa cum laude with a double major in biochemistry and psychology. He was accepted to a prestigious MD-PhD program, but unexpectedly declined the offer, instead taking a position with a pharmaceutical research firm in Oklahoma City. By 2018, he had legally changed his name to Ryan Matthews, citing a desire to honor his maternal grandfather's family name, effectively creating a new identity distanced from his past in Cedar Springs. What Ryan couldn't have anticipated was that the truth about Marlene Hayes lay waiting to be discovered, preserved within the physical structure of Cedar Springs High School itself. As the building aged and infrastructure updates became necessary, construction work would soon disturb the carefully concealed resting place that had kept Marlene's fate hidden for nearly 8 years. The case that had gone cold was about to reignite, and the brilliant, methodical Ryan Donahue would discover that even the most carefully constructed alibis eventually crumble when confronted with physical evidence. The school that had witnessed his greatest academic triumphs was about to reveal his darkest secret, bringing long-delayed justice for Marlene Hayes. March 15, 2018 began as an ordinary day at Cedar Springs High School. The building, now showing its age after nearly 4 decades of continuous use, was undergoing the first phase of a comprehensive renovation project. The East Wing, home to Marlene Hayes' former classroom, was scheduled for structural reinforcement and modernization of the aging HVAC system. At approximately 1:37 p.m., construction worker Miguel Sanchez was removing sections of drywall in a small mechanical room adjacent to what had once been the janitorial storage area. This space, measuring just 8 feet by 10 feet, had been rendered obsolete during minor renovations in 2012, when the school installed updated cleaning equipment that required a larger storage facility. The original storage room had been sealed off and largely forgotten, appearing on building plans simply as decommissioned utility space. I noticed something wasn't right with the wall as soon as I started cutting, Sanchez later testified. The drywall was newer than it should have been, maybe 8 or 9 years old instead of 40, and it had been installed over the original wall rather than replacing it, which wasn't standard construction practice. As Sanchez removed the outer layer of drywall, he discovered a second, older wall behind it. Between these 2 layers was a narrow void space approximately 18 inches deep, an architectural anomaly not indicated on any building plans. The peculiarity prompted him to proceed with caution, documenting the unusual construction with photos on his phone. When Sanchez removed a 2-foot section of the inner wall, he made the discovery that would reopen a case that had gone cold nearly 8 years earlier. Inside the void space, wrapped in heavy-duty black plastic sheeting, were human remains. "I knew immediately we were dealing with something serious," Sanchez recalled. "I secured the area and called my supervisor, who contacted the police within minutes." Cedar Springs Police Department responded with a team led by Captain Serena Diaz, the former detective who had investigated Marlene Hayes' disappearance and who had kept the case mentally active despite its official dormant status. When Diaz arrived at the scene, she later described experiencing a feeling of profound validation, tinged with immense sadness. "We had always believed Marlene never left the building," Diaz stated. Now we had the tragic confirmation of that theory. The construction site was immediately secured as a crime scene. Forensic teams worked methodically over the next 72 hours to recover and document all evidence. The remains, while significantly decomposed, were remarkably well preserved due to several environmental factors. The sealed nature of the space had limited exposure to oxygen and insects, while the location adjacent to an air conditioning duct had maintained consistently cool temperatures. Dr. Lawrence Chen, the medical examiner assigned to the case, made a preliminary identification based on dental records. The dental work was a perfect match for Marlene Hayes, he confirmed on March 17th. DNA testing would later provide definitive confirmation, but we were confident in the identification from the outset. The autopsy revealed critical information about Marlene's final moments. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, consistent with a single powerful impact. A fragment of ceramic material embedded in the wound matched the composition of the travel mug Marlene had been carrying when last seen on security footage, suggesting it had been used as an improvised weapon. Additional findings painted a clearer picture of the sequence of events. Defensive wounds on Marlene's forearms indicated she had raised her arms to protect herself during the attack. Trace evidence of coffee was found on the remains of her clothing, suggesting her mug had been broken during the initial confrontation. Most significantly, fibers recovered from beneath her fingernails would provide the first direct physical evidence linking the crime to Ryan Donahue. The fibers were from a distinctive type of cotton blend used in Cedar Springs High School's athletic department sweatshirts from 2009 to 2011, explained forensic analyst Tamara Wilson. These specific navy blue fibers contained a unique dye lot that matched items provided to varsity debate team members, a team captained by Ryan Donahue during the 2010-2011 academic year. The crime scene itself revealed the calculated nature of the concealment. The void space had been created specifically to hide Marlene's body, with the secondary wall constructed using materials available in the school's maintenance department. Analysis of the drywall compound used to finish the new wall dated its installation to September 2010, consistent with the timeline of Marlene's disappearance. This wasn't an impulsive hiding place. Detective Marcus Reynolds, who joined the reopened investigation, observed, "This was a premeditated concealment that required planning, materials, and time to execute. The perpetrator needed privacy, tools, and knowledge of the building's structure." School maintenance records revealed another crucial detail. The janitorial storage room had been scheduled for renovation the week of September 12, 2010, with new shelving units to be installed. The work order had been postponed when Marlene disappeared, as the entire school became part of the investigation. By the time regular maintenance resumed weeks later, the storage room project had been deprioritized and eventually forgotten. The timing suggests the killer knew about the scheduled renovation, Captain Diaz theorized. They likely assumed the body would be discovered within days, by which time they would have established an alibi and diverted suspicion elsewhere. When the renovation was cancelled, the unintended perfect hiding place was created. As forensic analysis continued, investigators returned to the hospital security system that had provided Ryan Donahue's alibi. In the intervening years, Cedar Creek Hospital had undergone a complete security overhaul following an unrelated incident in 2015. During this process, vulnerabilities in the original system had been documented, including a critical flaw in the volunteer check-in procedure. The original system recorded entry and exit times, but did not verify continuous presence, explained Kyle Brennan, the security consultant who had implemented the upgrades. More importantly, we discovered that scanning a volunteer badge on entry automatically scheduled a default exit scan 9 hours later, unless manually overridden by scanning out earlier. This revelation transformed the understanding of Ryan's alibi. If he had scanned in at 5:43 a.m. and then left his badge behind, the system would have recorded his presence continuously until either he returned to scan out manually or the automatic 9-hour window elapsed. This security vulnerability provided ample opportunity for Ryan to leave the hospital undetected, drive to Cedar Springs High School, confront Marlene, and return to the hospital before classes began at 9:30 a.m. Armed with this new understanding and the physical evidence from the crime scene, investigators began rebuilding the timeline of September 12, 2010, with remarkable precision. 5:43 a.m. Ryan Donahue scans into Cedar Creek Hospital volunteer entrance. 5:50 a.m. approx. Ryan exits through an emergency stairwell not covered by security cameras. 6:15 a.m. approx. Ryan arrives at Cedar Springs High School, parking in the student lot rather than the main lot where cameras were installed. 6:28 a.m. Marlene Hayes arrives at school, captured on parking lot security footage. 6:40 a.m. Marlene meets with Ryan in her classroom to discuss plagiarism concerns regarding his college applications. 6:47 a.m. Confrontation occurs. Marlene is struck with the ceramic travel mug and killed. 7. Rona, 7:30 a.m. Ryan moves Marlene's body to the janitorial storage room using a maintenance cart visible on hallway footage, but with the operator's face obscured. 7:10 to 7:20 a.m. Ryan drives north with Marlene's phone, explaining the cell tower pings that had confused the original investigation. 8:45 a.m. Approx. Ryan returns to Cedar Creek Hospital. 9:08 a.m. Ryan scans out of the hospital volunteer system. 9:30 a.m. Ryan arrives at school for his first period class, establishing his public presence for the day. With the timeline reconstructed, investigators faced a new challenge. Ryan Donahue was no longer Ryan Donahue. After graduating from Cornell in 2015, he had legally changed his name to Ryan Matthews and relocated to Oklahoma City, where he worked as a research director for Meridian Pharmaceuticals. His digital footprint under his new identity was minimal. No social media presence, no public records beyond those required for his professional licensing. He had effectively created a new life, Captain Diaz noted, but the physical evidence connecting him to Marlene's murder was irrefutable. The question now was how to locate and apprehend him without alerting him to the investigation. The task force established to handle the reopened case decided on a careful approach. Rather than immediately filing charges that might appear in public records, they obtained sealed indictments and coordinated with the FBI to monitor Ryan's movements discreetly. Surveillance confirmed he was living in an upscale apartment complex in Oklahoma City and following a predictable work routine. On April 2, 2018, nearly 8 years after Marlene Hayes disappeared, federal agents apprehended Ryan Matthews, formerly Ryan Donahue, as he left his workplace. The arrest was conducted quietly, without media presence, to ensure maximum control over the flow of information. When informed of the charges against him, Ryan reportedly displayed no visible reaction. His first words to the arresting officers were, "I assume you've found Ms. Hayes. I'll need my attorney before we discuss anything further." The clinical detachment of his response struck investigators as consistent with the psychological profile they had developed years earlier. Even when confronted with evidence of a carefully concealed murder, Ryan maintained the composed facade that had served him throughout his academic career. As news of the arrest and the discovery of Marlene Hayes' remains spread through Cedar Springs, the community experienced a complex mixture of closure and renewed grief. A memorial service held at Cedar Springs High School drew over 600 attendees, including many former students whose lives Marlene had influenced. "She stood for integrity above all else," eulogized Carol Jenkins, the former English department head who had retired in 2015. In the end, it was her unwavering commitment to that principle that cost her her life. But it's also what ensures her legacy will endure. For the investigators, who had never fully abandoned the case, the discovery brought professional vindication tinged with solemnity. Detective Troy Blackwell came out of retirement to attend the memorial service where he embraced Captain Diaz, the partnership that had kept Marlene's case from being forgotten entirely. "Cold cases have a way of haunting you," Blackwell reflected, "but they also teach you that time often reveals what deception tries to hide. The truth was literally within these walls all along, waiting to be discovered." As Ryan Matthews was extradited to Texas to face murder charges, prosecutors began assembling the case that would finally bring justice for Marlene Hayes. The physical evidence was compelling, but investigators knew that the psychological evidence, the detailed profile of Ryan Donahue's development and motives, would be equally important in explaining how a seemingly perfect student had become a calculated killer. The prosecution team, led by District Attorney Elena Vasquez, faced the challenge of connecting the promising young student of 2010 with the successful pharmaceutical researcher of 2018. "This case is about more than proving who committed the murder," Vasquez explained during pretrial preparations. "It's about establishing why it happened, how academic pressure, narcissistic personality traits, and the threat of exposure created the perfect storm that led to Marlene Hayes' death. As the case moved toward trial, investigators continued to uncover new evidence in the digital realm. Advanced recovery techniques applied to Marlene's school computer revealed deleted files that further documented her concerns about Ryan's academic dishonesty. Most damning was a recovered email draft addressed to Cornell University's admissions office, dated September 11, 2010, the day before her disappearance. In it, Marlene had written, "After careful review and considerable ethical deliberation, I feel obligated to inform you of serious concerns regarding the application materials submitted by Ryan Donahue. Significant portions of his personal essay and writing sample appear to be plagiarized from published sources." The email had never been sent, but its existence confirmed Marlene's intention to report the plagiarism, an action that would have likely resulted in Cornell rescinding Ryan's early acceptance, derailing the carefully constructed future he had envisioned for himself. For Detective Diaz, now supervising the prosecution's investigative team, this digital evidence provided the final piece of the puzzle. Marlene was killed because she valued integrity more than she feared confrontation, Diaz concluded. Ryan Donahue, for all his academic accomplishments, couldn't risk exposure as a fraud, and he made the calculation that eliminating Marlene was his most rational option. As investigators prepared to present their findings in court, the hidden wall in Cedar Springs High School had yielded more than just physical remains. It had revealed the devastating consequences when pathological ambition collides with unwavering principle. The case was no longer just about how Marlene Hayes died, but about the system of pressures and psychological factors that had transformed a high-achieving student into someone capable of murder to protect his carefully constructed facade. The stage was now set for a trial that would not only determine Ryan Matthews' legal fate, but would also force Cedar Springs to confront uncomfortable questions about the pressure placed on young people to succeed at any cost. For the community that had celebrated Ryan as its most promising son, the reckoning would be as painful as it was necessary. As the case against Ryan Matthews, formerly Ryan Donahue, moved toward trial in the summer of 2018, Captain Serena Diaz recognized that the 8-year gap between crime and arrest created unique evidentiary challenges. While the discovery of Marlene Hayes' remains provided crucial physical evidence, the prosecution needed to establish an irrefutable connection between the promising student of 2010 and the calculated killer who had concealed his crime for nearly a decade. DNA evidence has transformed cold case investigations, explained Dr. Amelia Rodriguez, the forensic genetics specialist brought onto the case. But its true power lies not just in identification, but in telling the story of contact, how and when a perpetrator interacted with a victim. The first genetic breakthrough came from the navy blue fibers found beneath Marlene's fingernails. Initial testing in March confirmed these matched the unique dye composition used in Cedar Springs High School debate team sweatshirts from the 2009-2010 academic year. However, this evidence alone created only circumstantial connection, as multiple students had worn identical sweatshirts. In May 2018, investigators applied a cutting-edge technique called touch DNA analysis to these fibers. This method, refined significantly since 2010, could detect and amplify minute traces of skin cells left on fabric through casual contact. The process required 3 weeks of careful laboratory work, but the results proved definitive. DNA recovered from the fibers matched Ryan Matthews with a statistical probability exceeding 97%. This finding transformed the case, District Attorney Vasquez later commented. It placed Ryan's sweatshirt in direct contact with Marlene during a defensive struggle. No innocent explanation could account for her fingernails containing both fibers from his clothing and his skin cells. Equally important was evidence recovered from the makeshift wall constructed to conceal Marlene's body. Forensic teams had meticulously collected samples from the drywall, screws, and joint compound used in its construction. Advanced DNA testing revealed partial profiles on 3 separate screws, profiles that, while incomplete individually, could be computationally combined to establish a match to Ryan. The perpetrator likely wore gloves during most of the concealment process, Dr. Rodriguez explained, but even careful criminals make mistakes. In this case, evidence suggests he removed a glove briefly while struggling with a particularly difficult screw, leaving behind enough genetic material for modern technology to detect. The most definitive genetic evidence, however, came from an unexpected source. During the original 2010 investigation, detectives had collected but never fully analyzed a discarded water bottle from Ryan's car. This bottle, preserved in evidence storage for 8 years, yielded a complete DNA profile that matched samples obtained following Ryan's 2018 arrest. More significantly, when investigators compared this profile to touch DNA recovered from the ceramic fragments of Marlene's broken travel mug, they found conclusive evidence that Ryan had handled the mug, the murder weapon, at some point before or during the attack. The DNA evidence created a genetic map of the crime, Captain Diaz observed. It placed Ryan at the scene, connected him to the murder weapon, and linked him to the concealment of the body. Each piece independently might be explained away, but together they formed an unbreakable chain of evidence. As these genetic connections were being established, investigators pursued another critical avenue, tracking Ryan's movements in the years following Marlene's murder. This task fell to Detective Marcus Reynolds, who specialized in digital forensics and had joined the reopened investigation in 2018. Reynolds discovered that Ryan's transformation into Ryan Matthews began methodically in 2015, immediately following his graduation from Cornell. The name change documentation cited honoring his maternal grandfather's family, but investigators found no Matthews in his maternal lineage going back 3 generations. He created a completely fabricated backstory for his new identity, Reynolds noted. His mother, Patricia Donahue, appears to have been complicit in this deception, referring to him exclusively as Ryan Matthews in all communications after 2015. Digital forensics revealed Ryan had systematically erased his previous identity. He had closed all social media accounts associated with the name Donahue, requested Cornell University remove his name from publicly accessible graduation records citing privacy concerns, and established new professional credentials exclusively under Matthews. His Oklahoma medical research license, apartment lease and tax records showed no connection to his former name. This wasn't witness protection or running from an abusive situation, Reynolds explained. This was a calculated erasure and replacement of identity by someone with the foresight to understand that digital footprints could eventually connect him to his past. Udam. While building their case, investigators re-interviewed key witnesses from the original investigation, including former classmates who had observed Ryan's behavior during high school. These interviews yielded new insights about his activities in the days following Marlene's disappearance. Eliza Thornton, the former debate team member who had previously described Ryan's chameleon-like ability to adapt to different authority figures, provided particularly valuable testimony. In 2010, she'd been too intimidated to share certain observations. By 2018, with Ryan in custody and her own career as an attorney established, she felt empowered to speak more candidly. The day after Ms. Hayes disappeared, Ryan approached me in the library, Thornton recalled. He mentioned that the janitorial closet near the East Wing would be an interesting setting for our upcoming mock trial scenario. Something about hidden evidence being a compelling narrative device. At the time, it seemed like just another of his creative suggestions for the debate team. In retrospect, it was chilling, almost as if he couldn't resist hinting at what he'd done. Another former classmate, Michael Chen, described finding Ryan in Marlene's classroom after school hours, approximately 2 weeks after her disappearance. He was just sitting at her desk looking through her gradebook. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was helping organize her records, since the substitute teacher was struggling with the workload. There was something proprietary about the way he handled her things, like he had the right to be there. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't know why at the time. These testimonies painted a picture of Ryan not merely evading detection, but revisiting aspects of his crime. Behavior consistent with certain psychological profiles of organized killers who derive satisfaction from their proximity to the investigation. As prosecutors assembled these evidential threads, they also focused on establishing motive, perhaps the most challenging aspect of a case separated from the crime by 8 years. This effort centered on recovering digital evidence from 2010 that documented the escalating conflict between Marlene and Ryan over academic dishonesty. In June 2018, a breakthrough came when digital forensics experts managed to recover deleted files from Marlene's personal laptop, which had remained in evidence storage since the original investigation. Using advanced recovery techniques unavailable in 2010, they reconstructed a folder titled Academic Integrity Concerns, containing side-by-side comparisons of Ryan's in-class essays with his college application materials and published academic sources. The recovered files showed Marlene had methodically documented at least 7 instances where Ryan's application essays contained passages lifted nearly verbatim from obscure literary criticism journals. Sources that would have been difficult for college admissions officers to identify without specialized knowledge of the field. Most damning was a recovered audio file dated September 10, 2010, 2 days before Marlene's disappearance. The recording, apparently made with Marlene's phone during a preliminary conversation with Ryan, captured her explaining her concerns and his response. Marlene's voice. These passages from your Cornell application essay are nearly identical to Dr. Harmon's 2008 article in the Journal of American Gothic Studies. This isn't borderline, Ryan. This is textbook plagiarism. Ryan's voice. I think you're misinterpreting stylistic similarities as something more serious. Besides, those application materials are confidential. You shouldn't even have access to them. Marlene. The university sent them to me specifically because I'm your recommending teacher. They asked for my verification of the writing quality. Ryan, so you're actively looking for problems. Do you have any idea what's at stake for me? We're talking about my entire future. Marlene, what's at stake is academic integrity. I'm scheduling a meeting with Principal Langford on Tuesday. Before that, I'd like to meet with you Monday morning to discuss your options. Ryan, options? The only option is you keeping this between us. Nobody else needs to be involved. The recording ended there, but its implications were clear. Marlene had directly confronted Ryan about plagiarism serious enough to threaten his college acceptance, and he had responded with what could be interpreted as an implied threat about keeping others out of the situation. This audio file provided the smoking gun for motive. Captain Diaz stated, Marlene Hayes was killed because she was about to expose academic fraud that would have derailed Ryan Donahue's carefully constructed future. For someone whose entire identity was built around academic achievement, this threat was existential. By July 2018, the prosecution had assembled a comprehensive case built on 3 pillars: physical evidence connecting Ryan to the murder scene and concealment site, digital evidence establishing clear motive, and testimony documenting his suspicious behavior before and after Marlene's disappearance. The final piece came from an unexpected source. As news of Ryan's arrest spread through scientific communities, a colleague from his pharmaceutical research team in Oklahoma contacted investigators. Dr. Sophia Patel had worked closely with Ryan for 2 years and described him as brilliant but unsettling. He once told me a theory about the perfect crime during a late-night lab session. Dr. Patel reported, He said the key wasn't avoiding evidence, but controlling its discovery timeline. His exact words were, "If you can control when evidence is found, you can ensure it's found after the statute of limitations expires or when you have an unbreakable alibi established." The conversation made me uncomfortable, but I dismissed it as macabre intellectual speculation. After hearing about his arrest, I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. This testimony, while not directly connected to Marlene's murder, provided insight into Ryan's ongoing fascination with evading justice, a preoccupation that had apparently continued throughout his transformed life as Ryan Matthews. As the case prepared for trial, prosecutors faced one final challenge. Ryan's mother, Patricia Donahue, who had actively participated in his identity transformation and maintained his innocence despite the mounting evidence. Investigators discovered that Patricia had made multiple trips to Oklahoma between 2015 and 2018, helping establish her son's new identity while publicly maintaining in Cedar Springs that he was pursuing medical research opportunities abroad. When interviewed by investigators, Patricia initially provided an alibi for Ryan, claiming he had called her from the hospital on the morning of September 12, 2010. However, phone records disproved this claim, showing no calls between their numbers during the critical time window. Confronted with this contradiction and the overwhelming genetic evidence, Patricia's resolve finally broke. In a tearful interview on July 12, 2018, she admitted to helping Ryan establish his new identity, but maintained she had no knowledge of Marlene's murder until his arrest. "I just knew he needed a fresh start," she told investigators. "He told me there were people from his past who were jealous of his success and trying to undermine him. I believed him. I've always believed in him. It never occurred to me he was running from something like this." Patricia's testimony, while not directly incriminating Ryan for murder, provided crucial context about his calculated approach to erasing his former identity, behavior inconsistent with innocence. By August 2018, as the trial date approached, the prosecution had transformed a cold case into an airtight prosecution. The genetic evidence placed Ryan at the crime scene and linked him directly to both the murder weapon and the concealment site. Digital forensics established clear motive through documented academic dishonesty and Marlene's intention to report it. Witness testimony revealed suspicious behavior and ongoing consciousness of guilt. Ryan Matthews maintained his formal plea of not guilty, but his defense team faced the daunting task of explaining away multiple independent lines of evidence connecting him to a murder he had nearly escaped accountability for through careful planning and the passage of time. For Captain Serena Diaz, who had kept Marlene's photo on her desk for 8 years, the genetic and digital connections had finally delivered what seemed impossible in 2010. The opportunity to bring Marlene's killer to justice. As she prepared to testify about the investigation spanning nearly a decade, Diaz reflected on the advances in forensic science that had made this possible. "In 2010, we were limited by the technology of the time," she noted. "By 2018, DNA analysis could tell us not just who was at a scene, but how they interacted with the environment. Digital forensics could recover files thought permanently deleted. These advances meant that evidence preserved from the original investigation could speak to us in ways it couldn't before, revealing the truth that had been hidden within these walls for 8 long years." As the trial date approached, Cedar Springs prepared to confront the darkest chapter in its history, the transformation of its most celebrated student into a calculating killer, and the long-delayed justice for a teacher whose only crime was upholding the academic integrity that her student had so methodically violated. The state of Texas ver. Ryan Matthews, formerly Donahue, began on September 10, 2018, almost exactly 8 years after Marlene Hayes had confronted her student about academic dishonesty. The Travis County Courthouse in Austin, selected as the venue due to concerns about finding an impartial jury in Cedar Springs, filled to capacity each day with journalists, legal observers, and community members seeking closure for a case that had haunted the small town for nearly a decade. District Attorney Elena Vasquez opened the prosecution's case with a powerful statement that framed the trial not merely as a murder case, but as a study in calculated deception spanning years. "This is not just the story of a life taken," Vasquez told the jury. "It is the story of an elaborate fiction constructed by the defendant, a fiction that began with plagiarized essays, escalated to murder when that plagiarism was discovered, and continued through years of methodical identity manipulation designed to escape accountability." The prosecution's strategy unfolded methodically over 3 weeks, presenting evidence in chronological layers that built a comprehensive narrative. Rather than focusing solely on the physical evidence of murder, Vasquez constructed what she called a timeline of character that traced Ryan's development from ambitious student to killer to fugitive, hiding in plain sight. The first phase established Ryan's history of academic manipulation and mounting pressure in the weeks before Marlene's disappearance. Former teachers and classmates testified about his obsessive focus on achievement and pattern of eliminating obstacles to his success through increasingly concerning methods. Dr. Eleanor Wright from Rice University provided particularly damning testimony about her communications with Marlene Hayes in early September 2010. "Marlene contacted me with concerns about application materials she had been asked to review," Wright testified. She described finding passages in a student's essays that appeared to be lifted from obscure academic journals. While she didn't name the student in our email exchanges, she was clearly troubled by the ethical implications and seeking guidance on her responsibilities as an educator. Digital forensics expert Dr. Tariq Mahmood presented the recovered files from Marlene's laptop, displaying side-by-side comparisons of Ryan's in-class writing samples, his college application essays, and the published sources from which key passages had been taken. "The pattern is unmistakable," Dr. Mahmood explained, highlighting identical sentence structures and distinctive phrasing across multiple documents. "The statistical probability of these similarities occurring by chance is effectively zero. This represents deliberate copying of source material without attribution, the definition of academic plagiarism." Most compelling was the recovered audio recording of Marlene confronting Ryan about the plagiarism 2 days before her disappearance. As the courtroom listened to Marlene's steady voice, explaining the seriousness of the situation and Ryan's increasingly tense responses, several jurors visibly reacted to his final statement. "The only option is you keeping this between us. Nobody else needs to be involved." The prosecution then shifted to the events of September 12, 2010, meticulously reconstructing the timeline of Marlene's final hours. Captain Serena Diaz, now testifying as the lead investigator, spanning both the original case and its resolution, walked the jury through security footage, cell phone records, and witness statements that established the sequence of events. "We now know that Ryan Donahue created the appearance of being at Cedar Creek Hospital throughout the morning by scanning in at 5:43 a.m. and leaving his volunteer badge behind," Diaz explained. "This created an alibi that initially appeared unbreakable, as the system would show him continuously present until he returned to scan out at 9:08 a.m. Kyle Brennan, the security consultant who had identified the vulnerability in the hospital's check-in system, testified about how this loophole created the opportunity for Ryan to leave undetected. The system recorded presence based solely on badge scans, not actual visual verification, he explained. Someone could scan in, leave their badge with a cooperative colleague, and be absent for hours without the system registering any anomaly. The most powerful testimony came from Miguel Sanchez, the construction worker who had discovered Marlene's remains in March 2018. Speaking through an interpreter, Sanchez described in precise detail the unusual construction of the wall concealing the body, details that demonstrated the killer's careful planning and knowledge of building materials. This was not a panicked hiding place, Sanchez testified. The wall was built with proper materials: drywall, screws, joint compound, primer, and paint that matched the existing walls. Whoever built it had access to construction materials and basic knowledge of how to use them. They created a void space specifically designed to conceal a body, knowing it would be hidden from view indefinitely. School maintenance records introduced as evidence showed that Ryan had volunteered for a summer program maintaining athletic facilities in 2009 and had received basic training in drywall installation and repair, skills that would have enabled him to construct the concealment wall. The cornerstone of the prosecution's case was the DNA evidence presented by Dr. Amelia Rodriguez. Using visual aids and simplified explanations of complex genetic analysis, she walked the jury through the three key genetic connections: Ryan's DNA on the fibers found under Marlene's fingernails, his partial profile on screws used in the concealment wall, and his DNA on fragments of the ceramic mug used as the murder weapon. Modern DNA technology allows us to detect genetic material even years after a crime, Dr. Rodriguez explained. In this case, the preservation of evidence from 2010 meant we could apply 2018 technology to recover profiles that were undetectable 8 years ago. The results are conclusive beyond scientific doubt. The prosecution's final phase addressed Ryan's actions after the murder, particularly his calculated identity transformation and efforts to erase his previous life as Ryan Donahue. Detective Marcus Reynolds presented digital forensics, showing how systematically Ryan had severed connections to his past, changing his name legally, but also manipulating digital records and creating a completely new professional persona. This was not a young man seeking a fresh start, Reynolds testified. This was someone methodically erasing evidence of his former self. Someone who understood that digital connections might eventually lead investigators back to Cedar Springs and the crime he had committed. Throughout the prosecution's case, Ryan Matthews remained outwardly impassive, taking notes occasionally, but showing little visible reaction to even the most damning testimony. His defense team, led by prominent attorney James Harrington, pursued a strategy focusing on the 8-year gap between crime and arrest, suggesting that evidence may have been compromised during this period. Time is the enemy of certainty, Harrington argued in his opening statement. What appears conclusive in 2018 must be viewed through the lens of an investigation that went cold for nearly a decade, during which evidence was stored, handled, and potentially contaminated by numerous individuals. Naji, the defense challenged the DNA evidence by suggesting that Ryan's genetic material could have been transferred to evidence through innocent contact prior to Marlene's disappearance. They highlighted his role as Marlene's student the previous academic year, arguing that trace DNA could remain on her possessions from legitimate classroom interactions. This strategy faltered, however, when Dr. Rodriguez explained the distinction between trace transfer and the substantial DNA deposits found on key evidence. The DNA recovery from the screws used in the concealment wall required direct, substantial contact, she testified. This is not consistent with secondary transfer or casual contact months earlier. Similarly, the DNA pattern on the murder weapon indicates it was firmly gripped, not casually touched. The defense's most aggressive strategy involved questioning the reliability of the recovered audio recording of Marlene confronting Ryan about plagiarism. Defense experts suggested the file might have been altered during recovery, potentially changing context or meaning. This argument collapsed during cross-examination when Dr. Mahmood demonstrated that the file's metadata and internal structure remained intact despite deletion, and that the recovery process had been thoroughly documented with independent verification. By the trial's third week, the defense's options had narrowed considerably. In a surprising tactical shift, Harrington began suggesting that Ryan's mother, Patricia Donahue, might have been more directly involved in the crime than previously believed, implying she could have committed the murder to protect her son's academic future. This strategy backfired dramatically when the prosecution called Patricia as a witness. Initially hesitant and defensive, Patricia broke down under methodical questioning from District Attorney Vasquez about her knowledge of Ryan's whereabouts on the morning of September 12, 2010. "I thought I was protecting my son from jealous people trying to undermine his success," she testified through tears. "I never imagined, never believed he could do something like this. But I know now that I've been blind to who he really is." In the trial's most dramatic moment, Patricia turned directly toward her son in the defendant's chair. "Ryan, what happened to Ms. Hayes? Please, just tell the truth. It's time." For the first time since his arrest, Ryan's composed facade cracked momentarily. His jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed before he quickly reassumed his neutral expression. The jury's attention, however, was fixed on this brief glimpse behind the mask he had maintained for years. On October 2, 2018, after 17 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. Deliberations lasted just over 9 hours before they returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The sentencing phase revealed dimensions of Ryan's character that further illuminated the case. Dr. Sophia Patel from the Oklahoma pharmaceutical firm testified about Ryan's professional behavior, describing his disturbing detachment when discussing ethical guidelines for human trials, and his apparent fascination with systems that could be manipulated. Most revealing was testimony from Ryan's former girlfriend, Jessica Martinez, who described in detail his pattern of emotional manipulation and his complete emotional shutdown when faced with disappointment or challenge to his self-image. "He didn't process setbacks the way normal people do," Martinez testified. "Where most people might get angry or sad, Ryan would become calculating. He would analyze the situation like a chess problem, looking for the move that eliminated the threat to his goals." On October 8, 2018, Judge Robert Altman sentenced Ryan Matthews to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. In delivering the sentence, Judge Altman addressed the defendant directly. "Mr. Matthews, or Mr. Donahue, your crime represents a profound betrayal of the educational relationship. Marlene Hayes was fulfilling her ethical obligation as an educator when she confronted you about academic dishonesty. Instead of accepting responsibility for your actions, you chose to permanently silence her. You then spent 8 years constructing an elaborate fiction of a new identity, demonstrating both consciousness of guilt and a disturbing absence of remorse. The methodical nature of both the murder and your subsequent evasion of justice warrants the maximum penalty under Texas law." Ryan's only statement during sentencing was brief and enigmatic. "People will always believe what makes the most coherent narrative. I understand that now." He made no expression of remorse or acknowledgement of guilt. For the Cedar Springs community, the trial and conviction brought complex emotions. The confirmation that their celebrated valedictorian, once held up as the pinnacle of academic achievement, had committed murder to conceal academic fraud, forced painful reflection on the pressure placed on students and the potential dark side of achievement culture. Cedar Springs High School established the Marlene Hayes Integrity Scholarship, awarded annually to a student demonstrating commitment to academic honesty and ethical leadership. The school also implemented a comprehensive ethics curriculum addressing the pressures of academic competition and the true meaning of educational success. For Captain Serena Diaz, the conviction represented both professional vindication and personal closure. At a press conference following sentencing, she reflected on the case that had defined much of her career. Marlene Hayes died because she stood for integrity in a moment when compromise would have been easier. The easy path would have been to ignore the plagiarism, to avoid confrontation with a star student, to prioritize institutional reputation over ethical standards. Marlene chose the harder path, the path of truth, and paid the ultimate price for that choice. Our justice system took 8 years to catch up with her killer, but today, finally, we can say that her courage was not in vain. The case fundamentally changed how Cedar Springs understood itself as a community. Beyond the immediate tragedy of Marlene's death, the town confronted difficult questions about the values it had celebrated in Ryan Donahue: academic perfection at any cost, achievement as identity, success as the ultimate measure of worth. We created a culture where a young man believed that preserving his perfect academic record justified murder, reflected Principal Keith Langford, who had retired in 2015 but returned to Cedar Springs for Marlene's memorial service. That responsibility falls on all of us, who celebrated his achievements without questioning how they were attained or at what psychological cost. In the years following the trial, Cedar Springs implemented significant reforms in how it approached academic pressure and student mental health. The school reduced emphasis on class ranking, expanded counseling services, and created ethics courses specifically addressing the difference between achievement and integrity. Marlene Hayes' family established a foundation promoting academic integrity nationwide, providing resources for educators confronting plagiarism and ethical breaches. The foundation's annual report consistently opens with Marlene's own words, recovered from her final lesson plans. Education without integrity is merely the accumulation of facts without the wisdom to use them ethically. For Detective Troy Blackwell, who had carried the unsolved case into retirement, the resolution brought both satisfaction and reflection. When interviewed for a documentary about the case in 2020, he observed, "Cold cases remind us that time is often the investigator's ally, not the criminal's friend. Evidence preserves truth, and technology eventually catches up to reveal what that evidence has been telling us all along." The east wing of Cedar Springs High School was eventually renovated, with the area where Marlene's body had been concealed transformed into a reading garden dedicated to her memory. The garden features a small bronze plaque with words Marlene had written in her teaching philosophy statement. "Literature teaches us that truth matters. Characters may lie, but the story ultimately reveals what is real." In October 2023, 5 years after Ryan's conviction, the Cedar Springs community gathered for the dedication of this garden. Among the attendees was Dr. Eleanor Wright, the Rice University professor who had corresponded with Marlene about the plagiarism concern. In her remarks at the dedication, Wright captured the lasting impact of Marlene's commitment to principle. Marlene Hayes could have looked the other way. That would have been easier for her school, for a community that celebrated this young man's achievements. But she understood that integrity isn't measured by what we do when compliance is convenient. It's defined by the stands we take when principles are costly. Marlene paid the highest possible price for her commitment to truth. Our responsibility is to ensure that her example illuminates the choices we make in our own lives. The case of Marlene Hayes has become a standard study in forensic science programs, highlighting how preserved evidence, technological advances, and persistent investigation can solve cases that once seemed impenetrable. It serves as a reminder that truth, however deeply buried, eventually finds its way to the surface, both literally and figuratively. For the students who pass through Cedar Springs High School today, Marlene's story has become part of the institution's DNA, a reminder that true education builds character as well as intellect, and that integrity remains the foundation upon which all meaningful achievement must rest. In the quiet reading garden, where Marlene's remains once lay hidden, students now gather to discuss literature, write poetry, and contemplate their own ethical choices. The wall that once concealed a crime has been replaced by open space filled with light, a fitting metaphor for how truth eventually overcomes even the most carefully constructed deception. Justice for Marlene Hayes came 8 years later than it should have, but its impact continues to ripple through the lives of everyone connected to Cedar Springs. Her death revealed the dark potential within achievement culture, but her legacy illuminates a better path forward, one where success is measured not by perfect scores or prestigious acceptances, but by the integrity with which we pursue our goals and the courage with which we face our mistakes. As Captain Diaz noted in her final press conference, Marlene Hayes died because she valued truth. The least we can do is live by that same principle.